Hey everyone, welcome to my channel Helpful History. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, and don't forget to click the notification bell. Today we're going to be looking at how to remain objective in historical writing. This is something you're going to have to do quite often and regularly, so it's important to get it right. Well, let me just say this. First and foremost, it's difficult. There are some things that you can't do. For example, you cannot use pronouns. You can't say I, we, me, us, myself, any of those, as this shows subjectivity. What does subjectivity mean? Well, subjectivity means, and how I always like to remember it, self. So it is explaining or talking about your own ideas and beliefs. To be objective is to not discuss your own ideas or beliefs, to not use I, me, or we, okay? It's important to remain objective in history because we don't want to doctor or put our own beliefs or ideas onto historical events. So we will never say the words I think. We never use emotive words. So what are emotive words? Well, for one, it would be I feel that JFK should have been assassinated. We would never ever say something like this in history. Okay? As this shows bias, and it's very important to remain objective. So now that we've kind of understood this and got into objectivity, subjectivity, objectivity being unbiased, subjectivity showing bias. And remember, rule 1 of history is to never show bias. Okay. Is it possible? Is it actually possible to be objective? Well, yes and no. Because no matter how hard we try to remain objective in history, there will always be a narrative. What do I mean by narrative? Well, for example, let's say I'm writing an essay about the Great Depression. And regardless of what I say in the essay and how I don't use emotive words, and how I don't use the words such as I, me, we, feel, like, I know. The fact that I am choosing these specific extracts from sources, evidence from sources to support my argument creates a narrative being a story. So my narrative would be, let's say, for example, let's use the idea that the Great Depression was caused by the Wall Street crash, overspending of money and excessive lending of money. Okay, let's say that's my argument, and I choose sources that support my argument because that's what you do in history. That shows this narrative and pushes this narrative where I am showing you and explaining to you, illustrating to you, that I feel, without saying I feel, that the Great Depression was caused by the Wall Street crash. Okay, and here's the evidence to support that. So that would be the narrative. So as objective as we try and remain by not using those emotive words and saying I, putting things in the first person, we still have this narrative that we push forward within our argument with whatever we are stating. And it's very difficult to get away from that. So at the end of the day, there always is a little bit of subjectivity. Does that make sense? Fantastic. So with that being said, let's get into how do you argue? Because it's very difficult to argue something and argue a point without saying, well, I feel that it's definitely this, and getting very emotional about it. But we all know that the best arguments are made without emotion. And that is why it's so important to leave those emotions and personal beliefs and prejudices completely out of your writing in history. So, you'll be given a topic for something you need to write on. And as we know, you will sometimes be given sources which you will use to support your argument and that are relevant to that topic. So now you have knowledge of the content that the topic is on. You have sources that are relevant to the topic. But now, how do you argue all of this without getting emotional or biased? So let's get into it. Let's use the same topic as the last video, which was explain to what extent Stalin succeeded in transforming Russia into a superpower by 1939. We already know from the statement that we need to be looking at his first two 5-year plans. How do I know this? The date of 1939 gives me a clue. So if this had to come up in an exam, I'd look at it and I'd see, okay, it says 1939. I know that the first 5-year plan was from this date to this date. The second 5-year plan was from this date to this date. And the third year 5, and so on and so on. So I know what area of information I need to be putting into this essay. Otherwise, any other information that falls out of this time frame or time period is not relevant. So you'll be wasting your time, possibly annoying your marker, and you're not going to get marks for it. So there's really no point in doing it. Okay, so based off your knowledge of the subject, so based off our knowledge of communism in Russia and the sources that are provided to you, you'll begin to lean to one side of the argument or the other. So you're either going to be leaning to that, yes, it was a success, or no, in actual fact, it wasn't a success. Okay, so let's look at a source. Here is an example of a source that could be given to you in an exam. So let's read the title. It says gross output of grain and industrial crops in the USSR. Okay, I've put that there. 1 centner equals 100 kgs. So just so you understand the information better. All right. So let's look at grain crops. 1913, already we know that this is before communism had come into play in Russia. Before the 1917 revolution. So we can see it was 801 million centners. And that by the time of 1933, it had already increased to 898 million centners. So it's gone up by 97 million centners. So throughout this information, overall we can see there's an increase in production of industrial crops in the USSR. Fantastic. If we are taking the stance that it was to a greater extent, we'd use this example of our source and the information from this source to support our argument. So once you've looked at your sources and with your own knowledge, you'll now obviously begin to plan your essay. As you did in the previous video that I explained to you how you go about planning your essay, you do the same sort of steps. So your aim in writing your essay and in writing anything in history is to state the information as it is. You're not adding your little tidbit of your personal thoughts and feelings because we don't want to know that. If you do that, as I said in the previous video, your writing becomes null and void. So you want to use your information as it is and then use evidence from the sources to support your statements. Your information and evidence you use from the sources will then naturally begin to make your argument for you, because you have already decided, okay, yes, it was successful. Okay, I need to talk about this. So I need to talk about everything that happened in collectivization that was successful. And then here is evidence to support that. So as I begin to write this, immediately it's going to start making my argument for me. So you're not actually going around arguing and emotionally stating your points and getting heated in your essay and bringing your prejudices and saying, well, I believe this or I believe that. No, you're definitely not going to be doing that. You're going to be saying, well, here's the information that shows how it was a success. And this information you would have from your own content knowledge. And then here is evidence from the sources that have been provided to you by the examiner, for example, to support your statements. And that's basically how you argue in history. So, for example, our idea for a paragraph is looking at collectivization and how it increased production. So you'll use your own knowledge. Okay, we know that it increased production. And you quote figures from the table to support your statement. This then illustrates your argument. So it shows the reader your argument. And then it drives your points home as you have figures and actual evidence to support and confirm your statement that you've made. So as you carry on doing this throughout your essay, your argument naturally forms objectively. Okay. So important things to remember when writing a history essay or writing anything in history, what you need to remember in order to stay objective. Number one, don't use I, we, myself, us, me, or I think, I feel, I hope, I know, I believe. An example that comes to mind of very emotive writing would be Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, where he starts off by speaking about how he has a dream. I have a dream that one day my children will be free. He uses emotive language. The fact that he's dreaming, the fact that he speaks about his personal experiences, it shows the treatment he has. It shows the treatment of African Americans in America at that time. So we can see that that's quite emotive. So again, try not to use that emotive language. Another thing you need to do is state the facts for what they are. Don't twist them. Don't add your own personal prejudices. And by prejudices, I mean things that we believe that we oftentimes don't realize we put into our essays. This could be examples of what we have been brought up in to be normal. So say you've been brought up in a Christian household, you might feel that that is the best religion for society. But then you're being prejudiced towards other religions such as Judaism, Hinduism, etc. And if you are provided with sources, use that information to support your argument, because that is naturally going to argue your statements for you, because here's the evidence. I'm not using my own thoughts and opinions and beliefs as evidence for my argument. Here's actual, tangible evidence that you can see, feel, read. And that's naturally going to make it objective and is going to drive home your argument objectively. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to hit the link for my previous video about writing essays in history. And hit the like and subscribe button for more content.